Shadows, all-encompassing and suspenseful, a key element to any surreal thriller, a reflection of intertwined feeling and a suspenseful threat. Within respect to color, the presence of vibrancy or lack thereof can elicit emotional appeals and thematic representation, presenting a stylized palette. Those dramatized shift narrative progression through striking contrast that portray character growth and potential foreshadowing. Frame-by-frame visualization can separate color from the story itself, allowing for a more overarching view for the sake of analysis. While color can protrude from the background to convey a sense of progression, identify foes, and establish a product's persona or brand, the emotional meanings tied to color are a considerably large piece of the puzzle. In this aspect, game makers cast a veil, embedding purpose for all with an eye's view. Color may be harnessed in a similar fashion as to audio design or characterization as a potent factor in conveying emotional tones, often psychological in their effects and in accordance with script pacing. With the birth of colored screens to video games, the use of monochromatic visuals was no longer necessary. Those games using a minimalized palette, as previously been discussed, but with only two colors, black and white, how might emotion be conveyed? In this case study, both Amori and Should Create Colorful Tale will be analyzed together as forms of media that use a monochromatic palette for at least part of the game, with contributions from Undertale, among others. That creates thematic meaning and progresses narrative elements. Through this palette, how might nothing and everything be conveyed at the same time? This idea that black and white are both nothing and everything simultaneously is not a new concept, as games such as Undertale have done similar before as a form of enemy identification and demonstrating that all character traits are present in enemies, given that white is the color that houses all colors in the color spectrum. Enemies contain souls, but are portrayed as nothing to create further guilt when the player character chooses death rather than mercy. The backgrounds of battles, being black in color with vectors, are done for similarly intentional purpose, to highlight enemies and create thematic meaning. Welcome to White Space, the in-between separating the dreamscape from waking life, a theoretical escape from the woes and struggles that reality has to offer, a simplistic and anxiety-reducing location. In Amori, black and white engulf the player character, seemingly representing both nothing and the flood of emotions simultaneously, as previously discussed. Specifically, white could be symbolic of a sense of emptiness, juxtaposed to the anxiety, fear, and trauma that are housed within deep blacks. The shadows seen throughout the game, most prominently in nightmare segments, are physical manifestations of these feelings. Ultimately, the protagonist is the game itself, with the narrative consisting of his life within dreams and reality. In dream sequences, colors are bright and colorful, with generally calming color palettes, purple and greens, presenting a time where things were better. A sheer contrast to the muted, less pastel, and largely dull colors of reality, which also demonstrate a sort of distaste. The game itself is stylized in a way after classic JRPGs, such as Earthbound, with battles drawn as if by a child. Emotion is core to the battle system, with each character having their own corresponding color to go with each emotion. Amori's representation of sadness exists as a deeper blue than the other characters, but what might be the reason for this? Why might this be? Perhaps it demonstrates his deep depression and broken emotional state, far exceeding his friends. Even within the dream world, his body consists of only two shades. Utilizing Zach Whalen's image macroanalysis and JavaScript program, or IMJ for short, visualizations of frames display the gradually increasing presence of color over time, as presented in a barcode format, the following of which only factors the first few hours of the game, displaying plot progression and the aforementioned ideas of emptiness and darkness juxtaposed to one another, which only get stronger as the game progresses. Surrounding every artist, a coil of expectations and deadlines shadow any ounce of emotion. In Chicory: A Colorful Tale, the food-named protagonist's idol, Chicory, the titular character of the game, is nothing as illustrated on the boisterous portraits held on such a pedestal, but rather a singular artist struggling with the heavy burden that is appeasement. The game begins with a joyful palette, but soon after it becomes instilled with a monochromatic scale that, joined with the many corruptions throughout the game's narrative, depict Chicory's depression, self-loathing, and internal comparison. Throughout the game, the player paints the land and brings vibrancy to a once empty landscape, being a satisfying sense of progression and conveying the idea that, to become a wielder, the title for those who dictate the palette to use, exists in everyone with the right encouragement and self-belief. Using a montage preset for analyzing frames instead of a barcode, it can be analyzed that moments integral to narrative progression and Chicory's depression are presented in a drastic black that contrasts white, sparsely colored frames featured prior. White areas then become those unvisited, being a unique form of displaying progression. However, it must be considered that the palette used throughout the game, aside from its dye-color form, is dictated by the player themselves, allowing them to match their own personality and vision. Thereby, analysis of the frames themselves is not entirely plausible, and thinking of the game broadly in respect to and in conjunction of the game itself and its themes is quite necessary. Amori and Chicory: A Colorful Tale display the overwhelming importance of color in the dictation of emotion and player mood in video games. Presence of heavy topics provide relatability, but with the unique medium of video games, gather a sense of immersion not capturable in a novel or motion picture. As developers continue to push the limitations of graphics and game potential, those artists wishing to capture one's emotions will continue to strive toward breaking those crafted conventions, casting a veil of feeling over those entranced by their tone.